If you wish to become a deep-sea rescue diver, understand one thing first. The ocean at depth is not simply dangerous, it is actively, relentlessly hostile to the human body in ways most people will never have to consider. You begin at 18 years old, enlisting specifically because a recruiter mentions, almost in passing, a program most applicants never even dare to consider. One of the most physically demanding and statistically punishing selection pipelines in the entire military. And something in that specific difficulty appeals to you more than any safer, more conventional path ever could. You report to basic training first, an ordinary enough beginning, and then you volunteer for dive school screening, a preliminary test designed less to teach you anything than to immediately eliminate anyone whose body or mind cannot handle sustained physical suffering. Timed swims in open water, wearing full uniform and combat boots, underwater, knot tying exercises performed while an instructor deliberately rips your mask off and knocks the regulator right out of your mouth. They aren't testing your technical skill. They are testing your ability to remain dead, calm, while genuinely disoriented and entirely out of air. Because the entire foundation of this profession rests on a single non-negotiable trait: the capacity to think clearly while your body is screaming at you to panic. You wash out of your first screening attempt, your lungs burning past at the point you believed possible during a long underwater swim. You surface early, gasping for air in front of instructors who show no visible reaction either way. You spend the following months rebuilding your body specifically around this single narrow goal: swimming distances that leave you nauseous, running with weighted vests, holding your breath in a pool for durations that terrify you on the first several attempts. You return for a second screening attempt leaner, harder, and considerably more disciplined. Having spent every free hour outside your regular duties obsessively rehearsing the exact sequence of failure instructors are most likely to throw at you, and this time you pass, though barely. Several of the original candidates beside you are gone, entirely quietly reassigned to other roles without ceremony. You enter formal dive school in your late teens, and the attrition rate becomes something you witness directly rather than simply hear about in rumors. Class sizes shrink dramatically within the first few weeks. Instructors intentionally create utter chaos underwater, tangling your air hoses, flooding your mask, completely destroying your sense of direction in murky water with zero visibility. They aren't being cruel, they are being realistic, because a diver who cannot solve a life-threatening equipment failure calmly in a warm training pool will certainly not solve one at extreme depth in the open ocean with a rescue clock ticking down on a trapped or dying colleague. You learn surface supply diving first, connected to the world above by an umbilical line, providing air, comms, and a literal physical connection to your topside team. But then you are introduced to saturation diving, an entirely different and far more extreme discipline. A world where divers live for days or weeks inside a hyperbaric chamber pressurized to match the crushing depth outside. You breathe a carefully calibrated mixture of helium and oxygen because at extreme depth, ordinary compressed air becomes dangerously toxic and disorienting. Your voice is instantly transformed into a high-pitched, barely recognizable squeak, a strange, slightly absurd detail that nonetheless represents the thin line between survival and severe irreversible neurological damage. You learn the physics of your own body's vulnerability in obsessive technical detail, nitrogen narcosis clouding your judgment at depth in ways that feel disturbingly like mild intoxication, oxygen toxicity triggering sudden violent seizures underwater with essentially zero warning, decompression sickness forming lethal gas bubbles in your bloodstream and joints if you ascend even slightly too fast after time spent under pressure, a condition capable of causing permanent paralysis or death. And you realize a sobering truth about every rule in your manual. Virtually every procedure governing your profession exists because someone at some point violated it and suffered that exact consequence. A quiet institutional memory passed down not just through textbooks, but through the specific, careful way senior divers describe incidents that happened long before you ever joined the unit. You complete your qualification dives and earn your designation. You are assigned to your first operational unit, discovering quickly that the romantic idea of rescue diving, dramatic underwater heroics, has almost nothing to do with the actual daily texture of the job. The reality consists mostly of unglamorous underwater construction. Ship hull inspections, heavy salvage operations, and specialized welding performed in pitch darkness by touch and feel alone. Real rescue operations comprise only a small, completely unpredictable fraction of your actual working hours, but the training for those rare emergencies never once relaxes, because the entire justification for your existence in this unit is your readiness for the day the phone rings, a state of readiness maintained through drills repeated so many thousands of times that your hands respond to a crisis before your conscious mind has even registered what is happening. You perform your first serious operational dive in genuinely hostile conditions, a violent, unrelenting current pulling at your umbilical and tearing at your body the entire time, visibility reduced to inches in front of your face. You learn quickly that everything drilled into you in the calm, controlled environment of a pool feels entirely different when the ocean itself is actively fighting you. Your training becomes the only barrier standing between you and a specific creeping terror. The claustrophobic panic that surfaces the exact second you realize you genuinely cannot see your own hands in front of your mask. You are called to your first real rescue in your mid-20s, not a full submarine disaster, but a capsized fishing trawler, inverted and sinking, with crew potentially trapped in an air pocket somewhere deep inside the hull. You dive into water so cold and dark your light cuts through only a few feet ahead, navigating by feel through submerged wreckage, surrounded by sharp, torn metal edges capable of shredding your suit and your skin in an instant of carelessness. And then in the dark you find them, a survivor clinging to a dying pocket of trapped air inside the hull. You communicate through quick hand signals and a written slate, because speech underwater at that depth is impossible. You guide them step by step through a tight, submerged passage back toward the surface, both of your lives depending entirely on your composure, holding dead steady for the agonizing minutes that rescue requires. You lose a colleague for the first time in your late 20s, not through any obvious failure, but through a rapid, catastrophic equipment malfunction combined with depth and current conditions that left zero margin for error. And your unit does not pause operations for grief the way ordinary workplaces might, because the next mission is often already scheduled. You learn earlier than most people in any career ever do how to carry a devastating loss privately while remaining fully functional and fully present for a team that depends on your steadiness exactly as much as you once depended on theirs. A private grief you learn to fold away quietly during the day and only allow yourself to fully feel much later alone. Your body begins accumulating a specific cumulative toll unique to this profession. Joint damage from years of extreme pressure exposure, hearing loss from thousands of hours spent inside loud, pressurized chambers, occasional unexplained fatigue that doctors eventually connect to microscopic repeated decompression stress, your body silently absorbing damage across hundreds of dives. You realize the unwritten contract of this career. Deep sea divers essentially trade a portion of their long-term physical health for an unmatched specialized capability, an exchange rarely discussed openly, but understood completely by everyone who wears the helmet. A quiet trade each diver eventually makes peace with in their own way, some earlier than others, some never quite fully. You are selected in your 30s for advanced saturation diving qualification, training specifically for deep-sea rescue and commercial work at depths ordinary scuba equipment cannot safely reach at all. You enter a pressurized chamber system where you and a small team live for days, sometimes weeks straight, breathing helium-oxygen mixtures, sleeping and eating inside a metal capsule barely larger than your own body, transported to and from work depth inside a sealed diving bell. Because once your body is fully saturated with dissolved gas under extreme depth pressure, you cannot simply return to the surface. Ascending quickly would cause severe, instantly fatal decompression sickness, meaning an entire multi-week mission requires days of continuous gradual decompression inside that metal tube before you are medically cleared to breathe ordinary surface air again. You perform genuine submarine rescue operations later in your career called in alongside a specialized international response team when a submersible suffers a catastrophic emergency, racing against a ticking oxygen supply clock that gives trapped crew members only a fixed number of hours before the air inside their hull becomes unsurvivable. You dive in extreme cold at depths ordinary rescue divers never touch, locating the disabled vessel using sonar guidance relayed from the surface. You work with cold mechanical precision to attach rescue gear and guide a rescue bell into docking position. The entire operation unfolding in near total darkness under crushing pressure, while people you have never met are trapped somewhere just inches beyond your dive light. Their survival depends entirely on your team executing a procedure you have rehearsed dozens of times in training. But this time, it is for real, with absolutely zero room for a second attempt if the first one fails. Your own heavy breathing, the only sound inside your helmet, as the rescue bell descends past the depth where sunlight last reached. You surface from that operation into an intensity of exhaustion that has nothing to do with physical exertion. It comes from the sustained absolute focus required across hours of an operation where a single miscalculation could have cost multiple lives in an instant. You understand, in that specific exhausted silence afterward, why so few people remain in this profession for an entire career. The psychological weight compounds with every single operation. Regardless of the outcome, success brings its own quiet, delayed relief, and failure bringing a grief that some divers in this business never fully recover from. You mentor younger divers in your later career, the way senior divers once mentored you, watching them fail their first screening attempts and rebuild themselves exactly as you once did, recognizing in their exhausted, determined faces the same specific stubbornness that first carried you through an underwater swim you were not initially strong enough to complete. And you find teaching them to remain dead, calm, while an instructor deliberately floods their mask in a training pool, a particular satisfaction that no single rescue operation ever quite provided on its own. Watching a nervous recruit service for the first time genuinely proud of themselves, in a way that reminds you exactly why you kept returning after your own failed attempts. You are asked occasionally by a young diver facing their first operational deployment whether it was all worth it, whether the physical toll, the psychological weight, and the colleagues lost along the way were genuinely worth the specific capability you eventually earned. You consider the question with the same careful deliberation you would bring to reading an unfamiliar current before a difficult dive. You think about every survivor you personally guided back toward the surface, and every one you could not, and you tell them the truth. This profession will quietly extract a physical and psychological cost from you that few outside it will ever fully understand or acknowledge. But there are very few people in any generation trusted with the specific, narrow capability to descend into complete darkness and crushing pressure and bring another human being back out alive. And that trust, however heavy it eventually becomes to carry, is the entire reason you never once seriously considered choosing a safer path instead. And somewhere right now, in a recruiting office in an ordinary town nobody outside it has ever heard of, an 18-year-old is listening to a recruiter mentioning, almost in passing, one of the most physically punishing programs in the entire military, feeling something in that specific difficulty pull at them more strongly than any safer path ever could, with absolutely no understanding yet of the failed screenings, the equipment failures, the colleagues lost to depth and pressure, or the submerged darkness this single ordinary conversation is quietly setting into motion, or what it might feel like after everything to finally locate a stranger clinging to a pocket of trapped air inside a sunken hull and guide them hand signal by hand signal back toward the surface and the rest of their life.